Making a list of the GameCube games that have aged beautifully without it simply looking like a list of the best GameCube games is a bit daunting, but we've also chucked in a couple of obscure picks here for the sickos as well. It's us. We're the sickos. These are our picks for the GameCube games that have aged better than Shinji Mikami talking about Resident Evil 4's exclusivity. How many heads does he have again? We were going to open this entry up by saying something to the effect of being a Star Wars fan hasn't aged too well, but somehow we returned that idea to the pile. Anyway, the Star Wars franchise might have some of the biggest peaks and valleys when it comes to the quality of its tie-ins and spin-offs. Some are great, some are terrible, but we're pretty confident in saying that Star Wars Rogue Squadron 2 Rogue Leader is among the greatest Star Wars games ever made. It's the first game I ever played on GameCube, and wow, did it feel like my PS2 was in trouble when I played it, because, whoa, seeing this? Whoa. Following on from the success of the original Rogue Squadron on the Nintendo 64, Rogue Leader once again follows both Luke Skywalker and Wedge Antilles as they wage war against the Empire. The campaign mode features many of the iconic battles from the films, including both Death Stars and the Battle of Hoth. However, Rogue Leader also throws in new missions and content in iconic locations such as Yavin 4 and Cloud City. As an aerial combat title, Rogue Leader manages to compete with the action and intensity you'd expect from a game like Ace Combat, only with the added bonus that you're piloting X-Wings instead of regular old boring fighter jets. Pfft. Even if you're not a Star Wars fan, which probably depends on whatever 5 shows they churn out on Disney Plus next week, Rogue Leader is an incredible GameCube experience and it looks gorgeous today. But you can't talk about gorgeous games on the GameCube without talking about this next game. I don't know about this cell shading, guys, it might not catch on. Nintendo, spurred on by your Tears from the Water Temple, clearly decided to make a Zelda game based entirely on water just to spite everyone, and also to make it look exactly nothing like most people had imagined. The result was The Wind Waker, arguably one of the best games ever made for the Nintendo GameCube and of all time, and a genuine example of a game that's aged like a fine wine. From graphics alone, which saw Nintendo deviate into a cel-shaded art style complete with cartoonishly proportioned characters, Wind Waker's aesthetic has managed to enjoy an almost timeless quality. Honestly, it probably held up far better than the more realistic vision people were hoping for. An indie game could launch tomorrow with the exact art style and people would consider it Game of the Year material, and it would honestly deserve it. However, Wind Waker's gameplay also deserves and needs plenty of praise. Sure, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom might have taken the franchise in a successful new, kind of sociopathic direction, but for those who love the classic dungeons, combat and puzzle solving of the older 3D Zelda games, it's on full display here in Wind Waker. If that's not enough praise for you, Wind Waker also manages to be one of the best sailing games ever made, beating out more modern titles like Skull and Bones quite easily because it's not Skull and Bones. Sailing the open seas in Wind Waker gives the most calm vibes gaming has to offer 99% of the time. That other 1% of the time is when you manage to find those bloody whirlpools though. Capcom put out some of the best work of their entire lifespan with the original Resident Evil 4, and while the various ports and new editions of the game have spruced some things up, the core game in general on the GameCube is still wonderful. We're glad Shinji Mikami didn't lop his head off, by the way, we wouldn't have had God Hand otherwise. Sure. So having to plant your feet in order to shoot some infected Spanish villager in the kneecap feels a bit archaic by today's standards, but Resident Evil 4's approach to action and gunplay, which forces you to face enemies head on and commit to attacks, allowed the game to keep some of that horror tension the series was known for. You know, in between Leon roundhouse kicking chainsaw wielding loons while some kind of dolphin woman shrieks at him like baby Mario in a skirt. Women. Ashley, make like the second and third letters in your name and shh. While the remake might have adapted Leon's European adventures for modern consoles and nerfed Ashley's ballistics, i.e. her voice, that original trip on the GameCube is still as compelling and enjoyable today as it was back in the mid-2000s, or in its natural habitat, the Zeebo. Hey there Derek, it's him Derek. Now here's a series that hasn't been seen with a brand new game since the early 2000s, and I won't shut up about it, it's a core part of my personality. Reset the counter. Look, we could talk about how F-Zero GX's 3D graphics stand among the best of the era, despite the fact that the game boasts 30 vehicles bombing it around an anti-gravity racetrack at over 1,000 kilometers per hour. Per hour? What a hoot. The variety in the levels, from classics like Mute City and Big Blue to absolutely stunning landscapes like Firefield, Port Town and Lightning, offer some incredible visuals that still hold up today. The sheer chaos doesn't stop the game from running at a smooth 60 frames per second, helping to ensure that F-Zero GX stands toe-to-toe with even the best anti-gravity races released these days. Yes, that includes Mario Kart 8. And Deluxe, of course, if you want more proof that the ideas of F-Zero GX have aged beautifully. If I was to finally get my wish and receive an F-Zero GX port for modern Nintendo systems, some might find issue with the game's extreme difficulty. While the physics and handling take a lot of getting used to in the first place, ensuring that players need to practice before they can become a true F-Zero champion, the game's AI and expectations of the player are unrelenting, especially during the story mode. F-Zero GX is blisteringly hard, but over time people have welcomed games that are uncompromising in their design and difficulty. We're not going to say that F-Zero GX is the Dark Souls of anti-gravity racing games, because that wouldn't convey how hard F-Zero truly is. Miyazaki lies awake at night in fear of playing F-Zero GX's story mode on very hard. Also of missing out on this sick t-shirt from Vultures.com. Don't be Miyazaki now. From one brutally hard game to another, Beautiful Joe perhaps launched a bit too early. Now that it's become a bit more mainstream to desire a challenging video game again, Beautiful Joe could have found a much bigger audience. We're not saying that it would have done, considering how niche the game's genre is or how weird the overall story, characters and aesthetic are, but there's perhaps the possibility that Beautiful Joe would have had a bigger platform to succeed from. Despite that though, Beautiful Joe's loving homage to movie culture and 2D beat-em-ups have ensured that the gameplay is just as incredible now as it was back in the early 2000s. You know, if you can get past the roadblock that is the very first boss fight. Anyway, who knew helicopters could be so tough? They're like the driver parking lots of the sky, or something. Like Wind Waker earlier in this list though, is the graphics of Beautiful Joe that have really stood the test of time the most, as the cel shading gives the game an almost anime/manga-esque quality. It's also a beautiful tribute to the world of cinema, specifically the Sentai and Kaiju genres, with Joe himself fighting giant monsters using massive transforming laser guns and egregious close-ups of his feet to pay homage to Quentin Tarantino. Maybe not that last one. Perhaps that's why it wasn't more successful. The ability to manipulate the film too by slowing time, hitting fast forward or zooming in for your close-up help keep the action fresh, as you solve puzzles and batter goons across the game's various levels. Capcom are deep in their remakes era at the minute, so if we can convince them that Beautiful Joe is still a real beauty, maybe we will get another one. Maybe? Question time! Which Capcom 5 game never came out? Drop your answer below and you could win a free Steam key for free. Nintendo took a huge swing by not releasing the Nintendo GameCube with a dedicated Mario release. Super Mario Sunshine might have been on the way soon enough, but new Mario games are events unto themselves. Instead, Nintendo opted to take a risk by having Mario's brother Luigi take the spotlight in his first proper solo game. The result, Luigi's Mansion, has arguably aged infinitely better than Super Mario Sunshine has, and I'm not just saying that because the latter sometimes makes me want to waterboard myself in frustration as much as I love it. It's definitely a huge part of the reason, but there's much more to it than that. Graphically, the original Luigi's Mansion does a lot with so little, nailing the spooky tone and aesthetic without delving into full horror. That's what the GameCube remake of Resident Evil 1 was for. The combat approaches of the game, which essentially translates to Ghostbusters with a vacuum cleaner, remains a unique yet totally Nintendo way to do fights with the supernatural, and something that's still incredibly fun today. However, the real quality of Luigi's Mansion that's aged the best is how it's elevated the stock of Mario's green-loving brother. Before Mansion, Luigi was going to be a forever sidekick, but now Luigi is a genuine protagonist in his own right, like the Jey Uso of the Mario Bros universe, and given equal billing in the Mario and Luigi RPG series. We probably wouldn't have had the Year of Luigi without the success of Luigi's Mansion, and also obviously not Luigi's Mansion 3, the greatest game of all time. Okay, maybe it's not having Captain Falcon in it is a minus point, unlike this next game. This one's so obvious I nearly left it off, to be honest, because it's Melee. The original Super Smash Bros. On the N64 felt like gaming's first steps into the world of massive collaborations, with some of Nintendo's biggest hitters gathering together for a massive scrap. Sure, fighting games were crossing over with each other, or in the case of Capcom, teaming with Marvel, but Smash almost opened the door for all kinds of games to start mixing it up with each other. Cut to now with Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, which includes characters and icons from all corners of gaming, while games like Fortnite gather IP like a British school kid gathering conkers on the last week of the summer holidays. Is that too much of a specific reference? Do kids even do conkers anymore, or do they just drown their enemies in Prime? Anyway, Melee's improvements over the core formula outlined in the first Smash game have made Melee one of the most successful fighting games of all time. Name another game that has people lugging CRT monitors and GameCubes across the world just to ensure that the highest level of players can compete for everyone to watch.
Oh, nice. Oh, wow, okay, that was...
Melee is far from the only fighting game over 20 years old with a dedicated competitive following, but the fact that Melee has managed to succeed, or in spite of Nintendo trying to suppress the community at every turn, has to be commended. Was I rapping for a minute there? It sounded kind of like I was rapping. Anyway, if you had to pick one game to sum up the Nintendo GameCube, would it be Melee? Let us know down below. Ever since we first crawled out of the water with our weird little fish legs, humans have longed for the ability to roll balls around levels that become steadily more complicated as you progress. First there were games like Marble Madness in the arcades in the 1980s, but if you fast forward quite a few years, Sega released their almost spiritual successor in Super Monkey Ball. Like Marble Madness, SMB started life as an arcade game before being ported to the Nintendo GameCube, where it quickly became notorious as being both incredibly addictive and punishingly difficult. In truth, all of that comes down to the game's genuine simplicity, as all you're doing is tilting a stage to roll a ball around. Because it's so simple though, on the surface, you delude yourself into thinking you can actually complete the ludicrously precise levels you're thrown into, only to fall off again and again and again. Because Super Monkey Ball isn't a complex game, Sega and Amusement Vision, who also developed F-Zero GX, were able to really put a lot of work into the lighting, textures and background, making Super Monkey Ball one of the most graphically impressive games on the entire platform. Given some of the heavy hitters that the GameCube boasted, that's a pretty high bar to clear. However, the real reason that the original Super Monkey Ball has aged well has to do with the series itself, as games like SMB Banana Blitz try to reinvent the formula by adding features like a jump button and boss fights, tainting the core mechanics as a whole. We'd say that Sega learned their lesson after releasing Banana Mania as a flat remake of the first two games, but then Sega had to add some weird online multiplayer mode to the latest game, Banana Rumble. All you needed to do was just give the party games online play, that's all. Also, all your most annoying friend needs for this next game is Nightmare. You're getting called out again, you know who you are. how do you top the greatest reviewed fighting game of all time? Well, throw in the Hero of Time as a playable character, apparently. Not including the Dreamcast or Melee, Soul Calibur 2 is arguably the best fighting game of the entire 6th generation. Again, the Dreamcast doesn't count. You can't compete with that fighting game library, sheesh. Technically the third game in the series if we're counting Soul Blade, which we are, because it rules. Soul Calibur 2 took the franchise to new heights with improved graphics, faster gameplay, and bigger single-player modes. Weapon Master mode was miles ahead of its time, honestly. What's helped Soul Calibur 2 to age extremely well though, aside from how good the graphics were and are, is how much Namco embraced guest characters. Each version of SC2 across PS2, Xbox and GameCube were blessed with their own guest character, and while Xbox and PS2 had decent guests, they weren't quite up to the GameCube's level. I mean, the PS2's Heihachi appearance is just Namco lifting a Tekken character and plonking him in with a bunch of swords, while the OG Xbox's Spawn appearance came about because Namco were already working with creator Todd McFarlane to put his original creation, Necrid, into the game. Quite how Namco managed to get Nintendo to agree on Link's appearance for the GameCube is anyone's guess, but Link mixing up with Nightmare and the gang has become a genuinely wonderful memory for most GameCube owners. And hey, the game is still just really, really fun. Right, okay, so has Go-Go Hypergrind aged well because of its gameplay? Not really, though. This obscure curio's approach to skateboarding feels like a weird and kind of brilliant cross between Looney Tunes and Jackass. The game sees a bunch of original cartoon weirdos all competing for a shot at glory by steering via skateboard into a variety of cartoon blunders, comboing as many of them together as possible to score points. Imagine Sideshow Bob was an anthropomorphic wolf and he hit a McTwist in between every step on a rake and you're about there. Admittedly, the gameplay is kind of ropey and weird and also a bit great, and if you want a better skateboarding game, the GameCube offers plenty of Tony Hawk titles to choose from. At least Hypergrind doesn't have Eric Sparrow in it though. In Eric Sparrow. What makes Go-Go Hypergrind a game that's aged incredibly well for the GameCube is all to do with the cel-shaded graphics and overall aesthetic. Despite using the same kind of technique that other games mentioned so far have also used, Hypergrind still manages to stand out from the crowd, and a lot of that is because the developers Atlas worked with Spumco, the creators of Ren and Stimpy, in order to create the game's roster of characters. They look like parodies of Looney Tunes characters, and that's completely intentional, but it gives the game an almost timeless quality. Add on to the fact that, again, this was developed by Atlas before they became a proper gaming powerhouse with the release of Persona 3 and 4, and you've got a game that offers a rare glimpse into what else Atlas are capable of. Remaster or even just port it then, gang, yeah, just so we don't have to pay these absurd second-hand prices. Completely unrelated question for you all, if you're reviewing science, right, do you rate pi or pi rate? Something to think about. And that was the video looking at some GameCube games that have aged pretty well, or at least better than the cast of most Mr. Beast videos after the newest allegations come to light. Anyway, I've been Jimmy for Cultured Vultures. It's been good to have you, and thank you for watching.